Chapter 7. Back when Florida was wild, when it consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes, so big they could fly away with you. Miss Franny Block started in, and I was just a little girl, no bigger than you. My father, Herman W. Block, told me that I could have anything I wanted for my birthday, anything at all. Miss Franny looked around the library, and she leaned in close to me. "I don't want to appear prideful," she said, "but my daddy was a very rich man. A very rich man." She nodded and then leaned back and said, "And I was a little girl who loved to read. So I told him, I said, 'Daddy, I would most certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be wonderful.'" "You asked for a whole library?" "Just a small one," Miss Franny nodded. "I wanted a little house full of nothing but books, and I wanted to share them too. And I got my wish. My father built me this house, the very one we are sitting in right now. And at a very young age, I became a librarian." "Yes, ma'am." "What about the bear?" I said. "Did I mention that Florida was wild in those days?" Miss Franny Block said. "Uh-huh, you did. It was wild. There were wild men and wild women and wild animals." "Like bears?" "Yes, ma'am, that's right. Now, I have to tell you, I was a little Miss Know-it-all. I was a Miss Smarty Pants with my full library of books. Oh, yes, ma'am. I thought I knew the answers to everything. Well, one hot Thursday, I was sitting in my library with all the doors and the windows open, and my nose was stuck in a book. And when a shadow crossed the desk, and without looking up— "Yes, ma'am, without even looking up, I said, 'Is there a book I could help you to find?' Well, there was no answer, and I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman, scared of all of these books, and maybe afraid to speak up. But then I became aware of a very peculiar smell, a very strong smell, and I raised my eyes slowly, and standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear. How big? I asked. "Oh, well," said Miss Franny, "perhaps 3 times the size of your dog." "And then what happened?" I asked her. "Well," said Miss Franny, "I looked at him, and he looked right at me, put his big nose up in the air, and sniffed, and as if he was trying to decide if a little Miss Know-it-all librarian was what he was in the mood to eat. And I sat there, and then I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I'm not going to let it happen without a fight. No, ma'am." So very slowly and very carefully, I raised up the book that I was reading, and "What book was that?" I asked. "Why, it was the big book, War and Peace." And I raised it up slowly, and when I aimed it carefully, and I threw it right at the bear, and then I screamed, "Be gone!" And do you know what? "No, ma'am," I said. He went. But this is what I will never forget. He took the book with him. "Yes, ma'am," said Miss Franny. Yes, he did. He snatched it up and ran away." "Did he come back?" I asked. "No, I never saw him again." Well, the men in town used to tease me about it, and they used to say, "Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today. He was reading that book, and he said it was sure good, and would it be all right if he kept it for just another week?" "Yes, ma'am, they did tease me about it," she sighed. "I imagine that I'm the only one left from those days, and I imagine I'm the only one that even recalls that bear. All of my friends, everyone I knew when I was young, they're all dead and gone." She sighed again. She looked sad, and she looked old and wrinkled. It was the same way that I felt sometimes, being friendless in a new town and not having a mama to comfort me. I sighed too. Winn-Dixie raised his head up off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny. Then he sat up and he showed Miss Franny his teeth. "Well, now, look at that. That dog is smiling at me." "It's a talent of his," I told her. "It is a fine talent," said Miss Franny, "a very fine talent," and she smiled back at Winn-Dixie. "We could be friends," I said to Miss Franny. I mean you and me and Winn-Dixie. We could all be friends." Miss Franny smiled even bigger. "Why, that would be grand," she said, "just grand. And right at that minute, right when the three of us had decided to be friends, who should come marching into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library but pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to Miss Franny's desk and said, "I finished Johnny Tremain, and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult to read, because I'm an advanced reader." "Oh, yes, dear, I know," said Miss Franny, and she got up out of her chair. Amanda pretended like I wasn't even there. She stared right past me. "Are all dogs allowed in the library?" she asked Miss Franny as they walked around. "Oh, certain ones are," said Miss Franny, "a select few." Then she turned around and winked at me and smiled back. I had just made my first friend in Naomi, and nobody was going to mess that up for me, not even old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson.